and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this session of the Cambridge Online Experience Asia. This webinar is not the usual presentation from one speaker. It's a session that allows you to take part and ask questions to our panel of local professionals and experts. Today's panel will have a particular focus on teaching in the primary context. This session will last for approximately 1 hour, and if you have a question, please put it in a question for the panel. Please add it to the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer it. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our panel today. If you guys could turn on your cameras. We have Simon Lind, has been in education all of his working life as a student, a teacher, a trainer, and an advisor, but with an underlying passion to never stop learning. Yusuf Imam Shodakeen is based in Indonesia and has been an English teacher since 2012, working with Ediversal as an education consultant in the English department. And as he likes to say, age is just a number. Havina Kaur has a Bachelor of Education degree and is a CELT-P Master Trainer and is currently in Penang with a focus on young learners at Cambridge Main Suite exams. And last but not least, Vivian Lin has over 8 years of experience in language teaching with students of different ages and backgrounds in Australia and in China. And she's currently teaching primary students in Qinshan Academy in Taipei. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start by asking a question to our panelists relating to our last talk by Simon. Whoever would like to respond, please let me know by raising your hand or just jumping into the conversation. Simon, you mentioned working with the school curricula to guide planning. Have you ever had any success with getting teachers working together to plan sort of lessons that they're maybe delivering the same sort of classes?
Yes, and there are a couple of different approaches that we can take with this. I'll start at the top. The sort of the highest level is this concept of the idea of lesson study. And this is basically where a group of teachers will get together, maybe 3 or 4 teachers, and they will plan a lesson or plan a series of lessons. And then the big collaboration within this idea of lesson study is they will then observe each other and give each other some feedback on how that lesson has progressed. So they will choose, for example, to focus on a particular element of a lesson. And in that way, this idea of lesson study, they can come across and develop their own personal skills while learning to collaborate. So at the highest level, and that takes quite a bit of school organization, but possibly at a more immediate level, what I would love to see, and this works very successfully in a number of schools that I've worked with around the world, is where a department will co-plan. So they will effectively divide up elements of the curriculum, and each will plan a section of that curriculum and will share that planning with colleagues in the department. So that means that each teacher is not planning every single one of their own lessons, but they're planning a group of lessons and then they share that plan. Now that requires them to have a particular planning template, to decide for them as a group, what are the key elements that go into that plan? And this is where the planning for learning option can come in, because they can decide which is the best, what are they wanting to focus on in that suite of lessons. It has the advantage of reducing the amount of planning that each teacher does. The only slight disadvantage is where teachers might want to put a personal spin on each lesson, but that is not, to me, a disadvantage. that is actually adapting it to your personality and your particular class. And that bank of lessons can be there for other teachers to dip into.
I think it's also important when we are doing something like that is to make sure the teachers understand that the teachers are not observing them per se as teachers, but observing the lesson plan. And that makes teachers more comfortable.
This is a very, very big thing for me in education. And this goes back to what I was saying in my lesson planning, and is a theme that runs through it. It's not what you teach, it's who you teach. But linked to that is the words that you use in the classroom to give praise or feedback. And this is applicable to teachers as well as students. And this is to focus on the task. So when you give feedback, you focus on the task, not on the personality. So and this works from senior leadership to the teachers, from teachers to the learners. You look at what is happening in the class. What is the task? So you don't say to a child, for example, "Ooh, aren't you clever? You are absolutely brilliant." Or conversely, "You are very stupid." You look at the work that they are doing and you say, "I like the way you have written this. You have used a good paragraph. You've done this sum correctly." You focus on the task. And in the same way, senior leadership team shouldn't say, "You're a bad teacher," or "You are a brilliant teacher," or something of that nature. You should say, "In that particular lesson, I think your interaction or your delivery or your use of language could have been changed." So you focus on the lesson, on the delivery, not on the person. So it's a bit of a contrast. On one hand, we're saying, who are you teaching, not what are you teaching, but then recognize that you've got to look at the learning that they are doing, not on the personality, which sometimes seems a bit of a contrast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. Would any of the other panelists like to jump in and share maybe their thoughts and experiences about lesson planning, or the troubles with them, perhaps? Yeah, Yusuf?
Can I say something?
Of course, please jump in.
To be honest, actually, when I heard what Simon presented just now, it flips my idea about the lesson planning. Not thoroughly though. However, I think it shapes a new ideas on lesson planning or making a lesson plan. Which is great actually. So especially when we see some teachers in our schools, for example, that we have never see or never have a valid planning, and the class performance is not as we desire as a management team, right? Mm-hmm. So of course, there are teachers who can implement their non-writing lesson plan, but the numbers are very few. However, I also agree that lesson plan should be flexible, right? So when we are planning a lesson plan, especially taken from the book, I believe it should give us a chance to think about what are some of the issues that teaching that lesson is going to do with timing, grouping, motivating students, and etc. Right? There are so many problems that could come along the way. So the planning stage is very important for us to identify the possible challenges that might appear according to our class situation, and think deeper about the content of the lesson, right? And more importantly, we should also think deeper on how we should make our lesson more to the student-centered. And according to my observation to some of the teachers in our schools, some of them argue that there's no need to make the written plan since they have had it on their mind. Because at the end of the day, even when we make our own lesson plans, something could happen along the way that could distract us from the main plan, and we have to improvise it. So yeah, I would say that again, that during the process of making the lesson plan, that's our chance, the biggest chance for us to think about the possible challenges. So according to this, I think it is safe to say that lesson plan should not dictate the way our teaching, but that should be the guidelines of what we are targeting our students to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all that I would say. Yes.
Okay, yeah, thanks you for sharing, Yusuf. Yeah, that's some good point. I might use this as a segue to talk about when we're heading into sort of our first class. Oftentimes, you know, we sort of look at how the students feel about their first class, you know, nerves that they might have, the anxiety. But if we flip it from a teacher's perspective, when we're coming into a first class, we also have these sort of nerves, right? How are our learners going to behave? How will the class gel? And you know, the materials that we have access to. And I think we secretly might also think, what sort of parents will we be inheriting with the learners, and the troubles that might come with that. It's a particular problem here in Asia. So my question is, how do you deal with students maybe in an online classroom that you've never met, who have never met each other? And how can you build that rapport between you as the teacher and the students, and possibly even the students themselves? So I'll open that question up. Feel free to jump in.
Well, when I'm unmuted, I'm very happy to start on that if you would like me to. And I said right at the beginning, it's probably going to be difficult for you to shut me up. But Vivian, you can start this time, as I see you've unmuted. So
okay,
great. You go for it.
Okay, great. I feel like for my first lesson, I feel it was very difficult to jump into lesson straight away without knowing the students. Okay, so for my first lesson, it was actually the grade 1 students. So grade 1 students. So I actually spent some time for my first 10 minutes. I actually set up my classroom rules. So virtual classroom rules first. So I set up, what you have to do for my lesson. So classroom rule, classroom outline, and everything. You have to go through for everything. Make sure you understand my teacher's expectation first. Okay, so that's my first lesson. And also I have to make sure I've got a student list first. Okay, I need to make sure I understand every single student, their name and which grade they are, and with also their label. Okay, so once I know the student's name, and also they actually know my classroom expectation, so I will start my lesson first. Okay, so when I start my lesson, I will spend 10 minutes. Okay, so start with the icebreaker activity. So make sure student can actually build a connection to each other. So because it's actually the first lesson, so we have no idea where the student actually coming from. Okay, so we actually spend some time to build up to start with the icebreaker activity. So for example, my first lesson, I start with what's your favorite toy? So especially for grade 1 students, they have that it's actually pretty interesting topic for grade 1 students. So they say, my favorite toy is the robot. My favorite toy is something. So they actually build a connection to all the students that actually would like to feel comfortable to share and talk. Okay, that was actually my first lessons. So building
like a show and tell activity with your learners.
Yeah, actually it's kind of show and tell activity. So just actually spend some time to make sure student is comfortable. They are actually comfortable to talk and share. And that's for the first lesson. Yeah, I still remember for my first lesson, I actually spent some time for this one. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Havina, do you, when you're talking with your students in your first lesson, do you, after like setting rules or perhaps like that, do you ever talk with them and like ask them what their expectations are or what their goals are for learning?
Yes, I think that Vivian is right. I do have some similarities with Vivian as well. I think the first class, as much as it's intimidating for the students, as teachers, we also have the same feelings. I think that could be for new teachers as well, especially myself, given the number of experience. The first lesson is always something really nerve-wracking, I would say, for me. So yes, so the first lesson, I guess Vivian's right, getting to know your students is very important. As what Simon said, In order for learning to take place, they have to know you as a teacher, and you have to know them as well. So I guess most of the things are really similar, except for some added thing that I would do would be to deal with the Zoom features as well. Because right now we're talking about the first lesson where we are not so sure how familiar our primary learners are with Zoom. So I think that I take a little bit of time and explain some features in the sense of how do I want them to respond. And similar to what Simon had just now, which was the traffic light rule, I do have that as well. However, these are smiley faces. So it's a bit more relatable to kids because they sort of fancy it and it sort of relates to them at a personal level. So yeah, I think that's some of the things that I do. And in terms of the rapport, I think that will take a little bit of time and it will get better over each lesson. So, yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of teachers always think that they're going to have some instant connection with learners, but it's like any relationship, you are building it over time. But you do get those very over-eager teachers, don't you, sometimes, that sort of come in and they're everyone's best friend. Yusuf, are you the strict teacher, or are you the very relatable, young, cool guy teacher with your students?
I think I would say I am the latter. So every time I start the new year, I mean the new academic year, I would act as as funny as possible. I mean, I know animes, Japanese animes. I know I try to know what games that my students are playing. So sometimes during our first meeting in the beginning of the academic year, I would use as many games as possible. I mean, the games that now are being played by young children or young learners, for example. Now they play Roblox, and I talk about Roblox, and everybody's like, wow, sir, you know about that? That's cool, something like that. Then also my students knows me as a, as a teacher who loves to talk about the mystery, right? So I love to tell my students about the story of a detective or riddles, something like that. So yeah, I think knowing what our students are into during our first meeting with the students will really help us as a teacher to get closer to our students. And it's really easier to get to be relatable with the students. So whatever we throw to the students, most of the time the students, they will get like, okay, sir, that's fine. It's in a very enthusiastic way. So I think, again, having to know what our students are really into is really important.
Yeah, actually, I agree. Simon, do you have any good tips with us for planning for that first lesson?
Probably yes. I will start off by saying that although I'm on the primary panel, most of my experience as a teacher was what I would call the middle school, the upper primary. So I'm not the expert like Vivian and Havina are in the youngest of learners, the grade 1, the grade 2s, etc. One of the things that I would think about there, and part of planning is with the parents, is to get them, and this is part of the work that I do around differentiation, and that is to create a student profile. So get the names and particularly the interests, the levels, but working with the parents. So for younger level, for the younger children who might find writing a bit more challenging or might find the sharing of information a little more difficult. But the idea is to get, again, a live document that can be updated, a profile. So what do you like? What are your interests? What do your parents do? Do you live? And you mentioned earlier, Nicholas, about this idea of the parents being quite a significant input. Now, I know from my work in Southeast Asia that in a lot of our schools, often the parents are very remote from the children. It's the nannies that actually look after them and take them to and from school and bring them in and out. But we have to explore that. We as teachers need to know that. So finding out that background, it also happens in England. I mean, I remember many years ago, a little child used to come to me towards the end of the school day and say, do you know who's picking me up today? Because he had no idea who was coming to collect him from school, because he was just sort of dropped off and, you know, is it mum, is it dad, is it nanny, is it granny? So we need to know this, and this should form part of our planning at the beginning. And again, taking what Yusuf said about this will help us to identify the interests of the children so that we can then relate to them. So Yusuf mentioned, you know, knowing games and anime and things. I mean, I don't even do social media. I have no idea what my grandchildren are into. They know iPads better than I do, but it's this idea of what do our children know? What's their life like? And that way we can get that interaction. So it's what Vivian was saying, it was what Harvina was saying. What's your favorite toy? What's your favorite character? Who's your favorite person? Who do you spend most time with? And again, and I know you guys are all English teachers, but I'm also very, very keen on this idea of bilingualism. If you can't tell me in English, tell me in home language. Let's share our experiences. Get that interaction. It's that interaction, it's that learning that is the most important part. Who are you? Because we have to remember, who are we teaching? And it's building those bonds.
Yeah, and there's some comments here in the chat, and I tend to agree with them, talking about how teachers should be creating these friendly and stress-free learning atmosphere. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with that.
I do have a comment on that as well, and that is just in the stress-free, but most important, especially for young learners, getting a very clear routine right from the beginning. And I see Vivian and Yusuf are, well, all of us are agreeing, but it's this idea of routine, it's safety, it's knowing, and it's consistent approach. And I think getting this idea of consistency, routine, and security, especially for our young learners, and all of us have mentioned that, but keeping a live document, knowing our learners, is really important.
But I mean, what some of the teachers might rightfully say in this region is, especially in that first comment with learner profiles, is, you know, the teacher might say, hey, you know, I've got 40 kids in my class, I teach 5 different classes. How am I going to be able to maintain learner profiles for this many learners? Is there any, do you guys have any experience of this, or maybe any comments?
Again, just going back to my experience, the way that we tended to organize the schools that I worked in is that teachers also had a class or a form that was their responsibility. So we were form teachers as well as subject teachers. And it was up to the form teacher to keep those learner profiles and make the other teachers within the school or within the year group aware of any possible outstanding or challenging children or anything that they might need to be aware of. So there was always someone responsible for a group of children and responsible for sharing that information.
Okay, yeah. Harvina, you are unmuted, so I'll take that as a nod to you.
I think that question is quite relevant because in Asia, I'm not so sure about the other countries, but we do have large classes typically, and it can be quite difficult to keep track of every student in each class, and then we've got so many classes. So it's just a hack that what I do is just to have a file with all the names and just to focus on a few learners at a time. So by the end of a month, we would have covered all the 40 students. So, and then you can add on as you learn something new in a class, you add on to that profile. So it is one that I think is quite useful for me. But
I think that's like what Simon mentioned earlier, keeping that live document, right? You just keep adding to it.
Yes, you just keep adding to it. Exactly.
Can I ask, how large is the class you teach currently? You mean just your average class?
Our average is about 35. The maximum is about 44. That's what we have currently.
I could only imagine what classroom management would be like for a grade 1 class with 40 students. That would be quite stressful, especially if if you had your director of studies there to monitor you that day. You're getting that panicky sweat with the learners. Vivian, you want to join? You want to add something? You're muted.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I agree with Habina. I also have 42 students in my classroom. It's so difficult, especially especially for the online class. Yes, 42 students with online situations. I have to train each of you how to use this one. Because we didn't actually use Zoom, we actually use Google Meet. So we actually spent couple hours to train them, especially for grade 1 student. We actually train them step by step. So first, what you have to do, next, what you have to do. So slow down with every single step. So it's actually take time, especially for 42 students. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's on that. How, if you're doing these online activities, how are you getting them to participate sort of in the way you want them? Is it about that scaffolding of learning the technology? And how effective is monitoring? Like, do you have breakout teams that you can observe them?
Okay. Okay, it's my time to share. Okay, so I've got last year when I had the lockdown online lesson, it was grade 2 students. So we actually assigned them a journal on Monday, and they actually have to submit on Friday in the Google Classroom. So on Friday, I asked them to share. I actually break them into the different rooms. I break into 7 different rooms, so 6 people in one team. Okay, so they actually have to share about their journals and people giving feedback. So after 20 minutes, they have to return to the main screen. Okay, and then people start sharing each other's point of view and their ideas and everything. Okay, so they are pretty engaged. Yes, so that was my previous online experience, how to actually engage with the online lessons.
Did you tend to focus more on one sort of type of activities? What sort of activities did you favor?
So that was just one activity, a journal, just a topic. Yeah, so we actually assign one topic and they actually have to finish and share their point of view and everything.
What other sort of activities did you try? Did you do sort of groups? Did you do any presentations?
Role play. Okay, we actually had the summer camp, the role play. One of the topic was the social study. Okay, we are doing the newsroom. So the student actually have to record. Okay, so they actually have to record their voices and they actually have to share. And we also do the role play. So one person to be a speaker and one person to be an interviewer and one person to be an interviewee. So they're actually doing a role play to each other's. They are pretty engaged for that topic as well. Yeah. So that's a pair work. Yeah.
All right. Have you guys as teachers, when you're doing these activities, did you find it hard to motivate? And this is a question that's come up on chat in the Q&A. Did you find it hard to sort of police making sure learners would put on their camera or maybe put on microphones when you requested? Did sometimes learners hide or, try to avoid being called upon? Yeah, Yusuf?
Absolutely, yes. I think in every class we have this type of students who never want to show their faces, so turn off the cameras like all the time. And sometimes we also call the students and they will just keep muting their microphone, something like that. I do have that kind of students, but then I think I'm luckier in my situation. We are working a lot with the homeroom teachers, right? So all the teachers in our school, for example, by the way, I'm in Indonesia. I'm from Indonesia. Somebody asked me about where I was from. I am teaching in Indonesia, and in our situation, in our school situation, we are working a lot with the homeroom teacher. So for example, we have this type of students, we will always discuss how can we solve this kind of problem, because most of the time, this type of students will do the same things with all the teachers. So we discuss with the homeroom teachers, and another good thing from our school is that our teachers in our school really close, is really close with the parents. So we share the report every week to the parents, and we visit our parents. Well, now we can only do it online. So in the past, we visit the parents' house like offline, right? But we share everything with the parents. Every single development that the students have, we will always give to the parents. So once we see the problem, yeah.
Sorry, no, continue.
Okay, so once we find any challenge with 1 or 2 or 3 students, we will discuss with the homeroom teachers. Then the discussion will go bigger. Like in a group of teachers, we discuss about what we can do about the students. Then we come out with some solutions. For example, yeah, sometimes the solution can be quite hard for students. For example, we use class dojo. So we also use the system of giving point or taking out the point from the students if they do this or if they are not doing that. It works pretty well in our schools, and I think the students also find it interesting, and they're happy with this what is it, giving point system. So yeah, in our situation, it's really good to do.
Did you find that giving points and it was a good way to maintain motivation in your lessons?
Most of the time, yes. Most of the time, yes. Especially the no answer is that when we have to take out some points from our students. That shows that sometimes as a teacher we are running out of ideas. What should I do with this with the students? So yeah, in that case we do the discussion with the homeroom teachers, and then sometimes with the headmaster we do that. And most of the time we have the inputs from our senior teachers, because we have many senior teachers that many times they share about what we can do, this and that, and it really gives so many inputs to us to improve our performance in our class, especially about managing the class and having the communication with the student, and that really helps a lot.
Okay. Javina, any tips and tricks for our teachers listening for maintaining motivation?
Oh, well, yes, I think that getting students to switch their camera, it is a task. Because some of them either can be, they just don't want to, either can feel, I'm not in a good mood today, can I just switch it off? Yes, it can be a task. So what we do at our center is we divide the lesson into 3 parts, where we have got the presentation part, the practice part, and the last where we do some discussions. So in the beginning of the lesson, we let students to vote for which part do you think you want to switch your cameras off. So they all have to come together and decide on that one session. So ideally a lesson would be about 40 minutes. So then if we were to divide it into, it could be 20, 10, 10. So then they get to decide in which session would I like to switch my camera on or off. Most of the time, the part where we teach, they will say, teacher, I think we prefer to switch the cameras off. But then they haven't got a choice really when it comes to practice and speaking or writing for that matter in smaller groups, then they have to switch it on. So that's just something we do. And
I really like that.
Yeah. And I think that we didn't really want to pressure kids that much to switch on their cameras all the time. So we sort of wanted to give them a little bit of empowerment to how they could decide how the lesson was going to go. So that was one. And the other one, like Yusuf said, was it's good, it's good that you have got constant communication with your homeroom teacher and whatnot. So this was a problem we had in the beginning of the year, when the pandemic started, when students refused to switch on the camera. We've tried everything, it didn't work. So then collaboratively, like what we did was we had a brainstorming session, and we decided that we were gonna give points, or like what Yusuf said, or marks for a classroom performance, basically. So the teacher sort of gets to assess the students based on their participation in the chat box, or how much they participated in the lesson verbally, or whether it could be on the numbers of cameras that were switched on that day. And it could also be attendance, something as simple as that. Yeah, that was just something we thought, which was great. And it gradually did help them perform a bit better. Yeah.
Okay, we've had some great questions in the chat and the Q&A box, and I'm sort of going to synthesize them. We've mentioned role play and we've mentioned discussions. What other activities can we incorporate in the online class? And how can we plan to make it engaging? And maybe an element of differentiation in there, so sometimes we have mixed abilities. How can we, plan for that and incorporate that? And how do we provide effective feedback for these sort of activities? So it's a very loaded question. I'm going to throw it out there. So Simon, you got your hand raised. Excellent. You're muted.
Unmute, and
Yeah.
I can lower my hand now. I just want to say that, first of all, unlike my three colleagues there, I'm not actually a practicing teacher, so I'm not even going to go down there. But what has come very, very clearly from listening to all three of them talking about their real life experiences is how they have all had to, if you like, shift to a much more learner-centered approach, whereby all of them have, through their experiences and through the way they've done that, they've given their learners a lot more autonomy. So they've asked them to decide as a group, when do you want your cameras off? When do you want your cameras on? They've asked them as a group to decide on what activities, what gaming. And this shift towards a very much more learner-centered approach is really gratifying, because it means that they are much more involved in their own learning. And as a consequence, this is something that even in a large class where both of you are teaching classes of 40 plus, this same approach, getting them involved as individuals in the decision making, moving away from this teacher dictating everything. This has been, I think, really a big takeaway from me, is how the remote learning has driven a very much more learner-centered approach. As for the rest of it, I'll let my experts, not me, talk about those details.
Okay, well, I'll open it up to the three of you, and you feel free to jump in.
Okay, so maybe I can start first, if you don't mind. Okay, so for my previous experience, I actually incorporate different online apps. So for example, I actually use the quizzes. So that's one kind of activity that we can actually, the students actually quite enjoy when they are playing games, especially when you assign a homework. If you say, oh, today's your homework is quizzes, they will be, wow, yay, because I can actually play games. And also I create some apps called booklet and also nail parts. So those is kind of online app that can actually engage with a different activity and also task, okay, with online apps. Yes. So that's one of my first experience. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I add a little bit?
Please do.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the advantages from working with young learners, because I'm teaching elementary students, right? It's kind of easier to make them engaged, or not engaged, but excited. As I also agree with the word of gamification. I remember somebody mentioned it about gamification, and in my situation actually, and my wife introduced me with this app, actually online app platform. It's called Classcraft. I think somebody or you have ever heard about Classcraft. It's type of game, like it's a RPG game that you can play with the students, and we give them task. So when they finish the task, they can get to higher level, and students love to get like to the higher level. So yeah, I would really suggest to do, to explore the net to get like, the best platform, the gaming platform for learning. It's really useful and students love it. And we can also add the materials from our books. For example, now I'm using Supermind. I can, give the task rather than using the application. So I jumped into the Classcraft and I give the task there, and everybody enjoyed it even more, and that worked really well. So that's I want to say thanks.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Yusuf. I'm going to just put in the chat box a link here, and it's a resource that I use. It's LearnHip. So it's a great little resource for online teaching, and sometimes I try and incorporate it in my training sessions. Yeah, I mean, let me just bring up the questions here. And also drawing upon some other questions that I've seen in the Q&A box. How do we, outside of just the activities, we'll draw back to this one, how do we sort of differentiate? Is this something that you've dealt with in your lessons? Havina, have you had to sort of differentiate? Have you had like mixed abilities in your online lessons that you found challenging? Would you like to share that?
Yes, I mean, I think that in every classroom, we are bound to have mixed ability learners. In terms of differentiation, usually this is a step ahead, I guess, for the teacher, where once we identify our learners' needs and their levels, and then we should be able to, like what Simon said, adapt the materials according to their needs, to their whether they are high ability, average, or they are slightly weaker. But doing this online, this is something I'm not so sure if I've actually adapted according to their needs.
I mean, I guess one of the ways that I often do is I might set different goals, right? So, like a minimum of, try and do a minimum of 3 questions. But, if you want to do more, if you finish, please continue, I guess. That's one little trick that I do. Simon.
Unmute before I start speaking this time. I've got it right, I hope. One of the things that I alluded to, and I'm going to ask Havina to actually try this out, but one of the ways that we can differentiate is through questions, and especially in the online environment. So by building questions, basically according to Bloom's taxonomy, and also trying to get the children to answer each other's questions. And if you can ask, by differentiating, you can ask perhaps your lower ability or those whose language levels are slightly lower, if they are able to answer fairly simple questions or lower order questions, instead of giving a response, even online, you ask for a response from other children, from other learners, or you follow that up without again giving a response. You follow that up with a slightly higher level learner with a slightly higher level question that is linked. So by questioning, and again, I know this works for older students, and I know this works there. I've not had experience of trying it with the very, very youngest learners. So I'd be interested, Havina, if you've tried something like that, or Vivian, whether that can actually work with you, but differentiating through questioning rather than expectation of the number of questions that you ask. Because again, I'm trying to drive this concept of thinking and learning rather than just memorizing. Whether that is effective for you guys or not would be very interesting for me to hear.
Okay, Vivian, how about you jump in? Javiera looks like she's still thinking.
Okay, I'm still thinking about my last online lesson. Okay, so I think I remember we did actually use near parts. So near part, we actually create different question and also activity on the app near part. So we actually can use a different device. So every time when I have online lesson, I actually open my laptop and also the iPad. So I can actually use my different device to check students' recall if they are doing the answer correctly. But once I find out the student has got 30 out of 50, that means she is the student need to improve. So we will just make sure we contact the parents. We just ask the permanent teachers to contact the parents. Oh, so this area you actually have to improve. So we actually can make sure we know students' learning progress during the online lessons. So, and also quizzes is also the app we can actually track students' recall. So still maybe got 5 out of 10. So we actually can use the app to track students' online learning progress. So I think sometimes I actually incorporate these two apps is quite pretty well to make sure I know students' learning progress weekly. Yeah.
Okay, and I guess it's a good way to measure how they're going, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I can actually understand it. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, Javiera?
I think yes, differentiation, yes, in terms of I have incorporated a little bit in sense of just varying the task. Like the number of questions is just one way, and like what Simon said, there's really a long way for me to explore young learners. But there are just some tiny little things that I do just to adapt the materials. And as such, what I do is usually just present them with one same material, but then I just monitor how well they're doing, because at that age, we will be able to identify our learners' needs. So I think the monitoring part is what's essential for me, where I get to know how well they're actually doing. In terms of apps or whatsoever, I use the online live whiteboard, which I think it gives a sense for teachers to know what are their students doing in their breakout rooms. So that's really how I monitor my students, as well as take note a little bit of the differentiation.
I guess like with monitoring online and face-to-face, there are some similarities. You know, when you have a big class and you've got an activity, there is going to be that naughty group that sort of sits covertly and they're sort of like tuned out from task and they're talking about something else. And when you are monitored, like when we've got breakout rooms online and you're sort of like scrambling between them, you know, sometimes you will jump into a breakout room and there's that like a pregnant pause and you're like, oh, what were you guys talking about, right? So sometimes you can catch, you know, that online just like you would in a real face-to-face class. I'm just conscious of our time. I do want to ask you guys a couple more questions. I'm not sure of your individual regions, but in my region here in China, we sort of went in lockdown, we've gone off it, you know, cases flare up, we go into snap lockdown again, we get out of it, and it's sort of Groundhog Day when we're in this cycle. How do you maintain curriculum coherency when we're going face-to-face to online to maybe some blend? How do we maintain that consistency for our learners in what we're delivering in terms of not just our lessons, but the overall curriculum? Would you have any thoughts to share with that? Maybe Yusuf, I'll call on you. You look very pensive.
All right. So yeah, that is actually one of the homework that as management, we have to always discuss and try to figure out how to solve it, right? So for example, in our situation, in the beginning of our academic year, we prepared our teachers with the trainings for hybrid learning, right? Because we thought we were ready for hybrid learning. And then when we started the year, well, actually, the number of the cases raised again. So we have to, sit back and, okay, guys, we need to do the online learning again. And we can talk about this again later. But I think I am really lucky to use the books from Cambridge, because for me, it's for us especially, it's kind of easier for us to use the materials that actually for offline learning, and then we can use those materials for online learning. And if we should use that for hybrid learning, as we are doing right now, it's still also possible, because all the lesson plans actually is provided by the application. It's called Presentation Plus, and everything is there. It gives us some really easy thing to do, and it's really give us some great insight about how we operate these materials, and everything is explained with a very detailed explanation. So as a teacher, we are really grateful to have all of them, so we don't need to think like 1, 2, 3 times, right, to think about how to do with this one and that one. All we need to do is just to follow the plans that's provided by Cambridge, and all we need to do is just to add some more platforms, so that our students will feel like home, and they can gamification that really helps a lot. So I mean, in English department part, we don't really have a huge problem with that one. So that's how I answer this question.
Okay, so sort of drawing upon material that you've already got prepared, and that keeps that consistency. Havina,
pretty much, yes.
Or Vivian, have you had a similar experience, or is it slightly different?
I have similar situations as yours. So I think teamwork is very important, and also collaboration can actually solve a lot of problems. So we actually get everything planned first and prepare, and it's a teamwork. So we actually assign a task for each teacher. So the due date is this day. You actually have to finish this one. So you have to you are responsible for doing the PowerPoint, and you are responsible for doing the lesson plan. You are responsible for doing the something else. Okay, so it's actually teamwork. So we get everything prepared in advance, and we actually post in the platform altogether. So Google Classroom. So that is the way we actually communicate with students and parents, and also make sure everything is ready for them. Just make sure there's something happen. Yeah, because we have no idea what is going to happen later. Yeah, so just make sure all the platform is ready. Yeah.
So you have like a shared central document that everyone can access as well. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
That makes a lot of sense, and centralizing it, and that way it's not getting scattered in like a million emails. I just want to make a quick comment. You guys in the chat, I've been like slowly checking it every now and then. Really fantastic, the level of sharing of different activities and things like that. Normally we're not super keen about websites being shared in the chat, just in case it's sort of something not really educational, but you guys have been really well behaved in the chat. So thank you to all you guys there. I wish we could have got to more questions, but unfortunately we are coming towards the end of our panel. So I'm just going to sort of ask our panelists now if they have any final word or thoughts of which they'd like to share with not just our fellow participants, but also you guys in the panel who are listening. So I'll open it up to you panelists if there's any last comments you'd like to share.
Should I go first? Simon.
Well, I was just going to say it has actually been a huge honor to be part of this panel, and particularly because I've been able to listen to real live teachers discussing their actual classroom experiences. And this has been absolutely fantastic for me, because I'm not currently teaching, I'm a teacher of teachers rather than actually a teacher of children at the moment. And it is so nice to hear that a lot of what we are trying to do at Cambridge and the approach that we're doing is actually resonating with you as teachers. So for me, this has been an incredibly enriching experience. Also following everything that's going on in the chat and just saying what a fantastic job teachers have done around the world to actually keep education going throughout this pandemic, and the different responses and the way that we've done that. And if we can take anything away from that, that is to say that as a group of people, teachers are incredibly innovative, very flexible, very responsive, and have kept education going around the world. Absolutely brilliant. So from me to all of you, thank you so much. This has been really, really enlivening.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, Yusuf, over to you.
Yep, thank you, Nicholas. As Nicholas said about me earlier in this meeting, that to me, years is just number, and that is I said that without with the meaning that no matter how old we are, you know, we should learn again and again, because in this, even in this meeting, I'm here not to preach or whatsoever. I'm learning from everybody, even from the chat. I could learn, you know, many things from the chat. Everybody's doing really, really well. So yeah, I'm learning. And then again, in our teaching, especially during this difficult time, we should always be flexible, especially related to our lesson planning, you know. So lesson plan is not something that to dictate us, right? So we have to be flexible with that one. And again, we should learn again and again. And, you know, I'm open to learn again. So this same situation, this same meeting, I would love to join again. So thank you very much for everybody. I'm really honored to be meeting everybody here. Thank you very much.
And I have to echo that learning. I have learned so much today.
Is it my turn?
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. I would say that it has been a privilege to be here today, to be part of the panel, and I think that I would like to thank Cambridge personally for creating such opportunities where we get to meet the panelists and even more so teachers from all around the world. We get to share our experiences together. Thank you so much for that. And it's so great to be reminded and to be given that little inspiration, especially during the lockdown, pre, while, and post, of why we do what we do matters in the lives of learners. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. Lucky last, Vivian.
Okay. It's very pleased to be here and to share my previous experience and also learn a lot from you. I'm sure it was a very difficult, challenging time for all the teachers around the world, especially like we have to we have to learn how to use the function, how to use the Zoom, how to use within certain times, within 2 days. It was really challenging and difficult, but right now, actually we overcome everything. Yeah. So thank you everybody and join this session today. And hopefully we actually provide some valuable information for you all. And thank you for inviting me to be here too.